From darkness to light, this is the story we all share as the people of God. He draws us out to draw us in. From the birth of Israel to the church today, God delivers and dwells with his people.
Hey group leaders, Jeremy here. Listen, something we wanted to do this semester is to shoot you a quick video every week to kind of give you a heads up about what's going on in the passage and kind of where we feel like the Lord's leading us as we walk through Exodus, which in a lot of ways this week kind of feels like we're, at the base of Mount Everest getting ready to start a long journey. And it is, but it's good and it's going to be fun. And I really believe the Lord's going to teach us a lot through this. One of the things that I really think is going to help as we walk through an Old Testament book like Exodus, something that I think the Lord is going to stir in our hearts and be reminding us of on a weekly basis, is that all Scripture, 1 Timothy 3:16 says, all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And I believe that the Lord's going to show us that as we study a book in the Old Testament. Maybe many people haven't even studied. Maybe they've seen a video that halfway describes what happens there, but never really seen the truth in it. And so anyway, really excited about that. Wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up about what's going to be happening. First, there is this book that you're going to be getting this week. This should be in today, and it's going to be just a little guide and a help for you to know what's going on and what to study and kind of get a bigger picture view of what's going on in Exodus. But two things that we're going to talk about Sunday that Exodus teaches us is number one, that it's a book about the salvation of God, that God draws us out of our sin to draw us into his salvation. And this picture that Egypt is our sin and the promised land is his salvation. We're going to see that for the whole 40 chapters, but we'll preview that today. Also, the other thing that I would tell you that we're going to talk about Sunday is that Exodus is the second book of 5 books that the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, which means 5 books, also known by the Jews as the Torah. Exodus is the second of those books, Genesis being the first. So we're going to spend a lot of time this week talking about how we got here. How did we get to Exodus? Because if you don't really know the story of Genesis, then the story of Exodus doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's good to know what is happening in Exodus, in Genesis, particularly with Abraham and the promises God made to Abraham. To see these first verses talks about the 70 people that were part of the house of Israel that come into Exodus, come into Egypt. So you kind of got to know that. You got to know why they say that. Otherwise, you're kind of like watching the second part of a movie. You've never seen the first part of it. So we're going to talk a lot about that this week and talk about a God who keeps his promises. I'm going to go ahead and give you the points to the sermon, okay? I got to look at my notes here. But I want to just tell you, this is where we're going, okay? Exodus is a book about God and his glory and the salvation that he gives to his people, that he draws us out of our sin to draw us into his kingdom, into his rest. And we're going to talk about these 3 truths to rest in as we look at this passage, as we see what God told Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who he changes his name to Israel, and then his sons, Joseph being one of them, who was sold into slavery into Egypt. Is Potiphar's wife tries to, romance him. He gets thrown into jail. While he's in jail, he meets a baker there. He interprets dreams there. God gives them wisdom to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh ends up putting him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And so then his brothers and his father come down because of the famine that is there. And in all that, God is keeping his promises. So the 3 truths that we're going to really try to rest in this week, and I want you to think about as you prepare to meet with your group, are number one, that our God keeps his promises. God made a promise to Abraham, and he keeps those promises. He promised him he was going to make them the father of many nations, that through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed, and he's doing that. So he keeps his promises. We'll read in the first verses there of Exodus that there's 70 of his house, 70 of his descendants that come into Egypt. Actually, we'll read towards the end of the sermon, we'll read about in Exodus 12, when they go to leave in the Exodus, when God calls them out after the Passover and all those things. There's 600,000 men on foot that leave Egypt after their bondage and slavery there. So he makes a promise to Abraham in Genesis. He's keeping that promise. And the story of Exodus is a story of God keeping his promise. That's the first truth we're going to talk about. Second truth that we want to be reminded of is that God's perfect plan in keeping his promises is usually different than we would have imagined them to be. God promises Abraham is going to make him a great nation. And how does God make him a great nation? He makes him a great nation through slavery. The people of Egypt are enslaved. The people of Israel are enslaved in Egypt. And so God is keeping his promise to Abraham. But the way God keeps his promise is not the way, I'm sure not the way Abraham would have thought that God was going to do that. He wouldn't think God's going to make us a great nation. How's he going to make us a great nation? We're going to be enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. And we see that God is faithful to keep his promises, but we don't always think that we wouldn't have done it the way that God did it. God has a plan, a perfect plan that is different usually than what we would have thought. And the last thing that we're going to kind of leave people with that I think we see in this text, and we see in the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and now in Egypt, is that even when we don't understand what God is doing, we can trust him. Even when we don't understand what's going on, even when I can't see, even when I don't know, even when there's tribulation and trouble here, I can trust God. I can trust that he is good. I can trust that he's keeping his promises. I can trust that he's working on my behalf. He may not be keeping his promises the way I would have kept them, but I'm not God, and I can't see the way what God can see. I don't know what God knows, and I'm not perfect in all of my ways. So the fact that God keeps his promises differently than I would keep them is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And I can rest that he is good. He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And whatever he does, even in slavery, I can trust him. Even in bondage, I can trust him. And that translates so well into our world today. Even my thing's slipping there. Even no matter what God does, no matter how God is working and doing, I can trust him. And I think those are going to be really good truths to rest in and to talk about as our groups this week. So anyway, there's your first video. I hope it helps. And I want you to know, man, you really are. We say this, but I want you to know we really believe it, that you are the lifeblood of Capstone Church. Our community groups and really you as you lead are so important to what the Lord is doing in our hearts and in our midst. And so I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. And however we can help you, however we can support you, however, if there are some things that maybe would be helpful in these videos that you would like to see, let us know, because we want to help you. We don't want to waste your time. We know that you're really busy. But we want you to be equipped to lead and to serve and to care for your people as we mutually are discipling one another in the Word and being reminded of who God is and growing in grace, and so that God would transform us more into the image of His Son. That's the goal. The goal of community is transformation, right? That God would make us more like Jesus, and so we want to do that together. So, however we can help resource you to do that, we want to do that. Thank you again for what you're doing. Please let me know how we can help you. We love you guys, and we'll see you Sunday in the new building, 2206 17th Street. This is a crazy week, but it's good. So it's all going to come together. Love you, and can't wait to see you soon.